But when Dan finished up the legislature around 7 o'clock our time, I sent him a message to share with him. I'm just going to go ahead. It's truly difficult to put into words the shock and grief and sadness permeated across British Columbia, all throughout our Indigenous communities, on the discovery of the remains of 215 children in Kamloops Indian residential school site in Kamloops. This heartbreaking discovery is just one example of the horrendous legacy of pain and trauma these institutions have inflicted on our Indigenous communities, much of which still exists to this day. I will continue to work closely with the leaders of our local Indigenous communities across the North to discuss how we can move forward on a path of healing and reconciliation. I commit to working with them. I know that many people have been impacted by residential schools directly and indirectly, and there is much work to be done and begin undoing the legacy that the trauma has inflicted on our Indigenous communities. And we must all commit to doing this work together and with open dialogue and open hearts. So again, that's a message from Dan Davies, and thank you so much for listening.
Is there any other drummers that are here that would like to sing a song? Because I've noticed there's a lady here with a beautiful drum, and if she's willing to share a song, we welcome her to come up and sing. I noticed her leaving down the screen down there. They said, if you brought your drum, you brought your drum for us. I'm now going to open up the mic to anybody that might want to say a few words. A lot of the time when I speak on behalf of a general population of missing and murdered women and girls, or residential school survivors, or descendants of residential school survivors. I myself am the daughter of parents that were forced to attend these institutions. And you know, I think of my mother every single time that I do any kind of work, whether it be with MMIWG or with the survivors of such horrific acts that were committed upon them by federal and provincial governments, the churches, and the RCMP. You know, I think it's really important for everybody here to remember that these churches are still funded. They get tax breaks for what they've done to our people. And that's got to stop, you know, until they take accountability for what they have done and truly release the documents that we so desperately need to find the rest of our children that they murdered. We cannot have any reconciliation with the church. And I know that many people struggle with their identity and their connection to the church. And I always tell them that all those years ago, those were not our ways. These were our ways. Our children wearing their traditional wear and dancing and singing, those were our ways. Our ways were never to be ripped away from our parents and sent to these institutions to be brutalized. So remember that when you're having an identity crisis with your relationship with the church, you should want to hold them accountable for what they've done to Indigenous people across Canada and across the United States, across Turtle Island. And I call on you to ask them, pressure them to release those documents so we can bring our children home where they rightfully belong. They don't belong in some unmarked grave laying there, waiting to be found, waiting for us to find them. The federal and provincial governments, the churches, are responsible to bring our children home. And we need all of you to pressure that. I have somebody that would like to share some words, so I'm going to pass the mic over.
So just a little bit of history, if you don't mind, I'm going to walk around with the mic because I feel a little bit more comfortable when I'm walking. When I walk, I do a lot of walking, I do a lot of jogging, I do a lot of running. be able to sit at the top of the table with the people who are at big chairs, but you should also be able to sit on the ground with the people, no matter who they are, what they are, where they come from. Another thing is that we need to remember, me myself, I never went to residential school. I'm a day school survivor. So one of my things is that I like pain. I like inducing pain on myself. I also, I'm not going to lie, but F myself over by self-sabotage. I am an abuser of alcohol and drugs. I'm also a survivor of extreme abuse. I've been raped. I've had a lot of things that happened in my life. But nothing ever came to the bottom of where I am today to say that I didn't have to depend on a man in order to get to where I am. And that coming from where I do come from, we need to remember that the Alaska Highway was built in 1942. 1942, 43 from there on. So we had 10,000 civilians, including Army people, that built this highway, which is the Alaska Highway, and it started in Dawson Creek. So you can imagine just how young our generation is when it comes to dealing with the genocide and a lot of things that happened even before that through the fur trade. I want to be able to appreciate everybody who has come here today, everybody who has danced, because every single time you dance, you are saying a prayer to God in our way. And I want to thank everybody here for coming here. And thank you for listening to my story. Today I'm here to honor Maggie and Nellie Lardo. They are two of the children who died at Kamloops Residential School in the cousins. I honor my grandmother, Anna Lardo. She was a resident of the Kamloops Pastoral School. And her brother David Lardo. And their little sister Maggie, who are still in C4, and I'm sure she's in an unmarked grave at Cooper Island Industrial School. My grandmother attended the houses, the Pino, the Christie School, and all those years they had that care that they had to live inside, and it was hard to get them to open up. But the pain that they shared with me is the pain that I feel today. And I honor my family and all those children and all the survivors.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You know, the positive words, you know, we're the product of a really negative thing, really monstrous things that happen to our people. But our people are so strong because what I believe is the mighty Creator God was by our side. We have not completely been destroyed. You know, I met the Creator of the universe in the early 80s. My life has been changed. A real reconciliation. You know, that because Native people have known about God, and you know, that was never lost. That was never lost. But there's still struggle to do, really struggle. I think there's a lot of prejudice out there. But when my boys were growing up, they were in high school, and the older one says to me, "Dad, I I want to help my people. And I says to him, son, if you want to help your people, you need to help yourself first. So he finished school, and then today he's an electrician, Red Seal, one of the best electricians out there. Because from what I hear from the industry, some people, you know, that's what our people can do. Our people are so intelligent, they're on top of the class on some of these things, you know. And my other son did the same thing. He went into film school and different things, and he accomplished that, which is really makes me proud. Well, the younger one told me the same thing. Dad, I want to help my people, and I told him the same thing. Like what I told his brother, I said, you want to help your people, help yourself first, and then you can help somebody. It's the same thing with this truth and reconciliation thing. We need to heal. Like a lot of people said, healing. That is true. If we don't heal, how are we going to help anybody else? I mean, you know how hurt and how devastated a lot of our people were. Like you see that on the streets, the results. But the thing is, you know, one day when people come together, white people, Native people, you know how we can change this world. I mean, there is a potential there when people come together selflessly. You know, we're not the only ones here. Like, yes, we got ripped off and everything, but the thing is, like, we come from a creator and mighty God. He says, there is none like him. And we are his sons and daughters. So a lot of times we can be selfless and go help somebody. There's people dying out there. There's the crisis we're going through, and on and on. But if we don't get that strength in us to be the man or woman of God, we can move these things that mountain people are talking about. We can move that. So I want to encourage people, you know, there is hope. There is hope, you know. So there is forgiveness. You know, Jesus got killed, sorry, but you know, but he forgave, you know. So mighty God forgive, we can forgive. But we need to work together, pull one way. And God bless you, God loves you.
Let me get it, Ricky. You lift it, Glenn. Party!
Where's Tommy?
Hi, I'm all here for work. Stuff on the park here. I'd just like to say for my brother, who's a residential survivor. He's lived with Badger, the residential from Saskatchewan and from the Muscatine Reserve. I've grown up and I've seen a lot of stress that she's been through. Wherever I go, every time when I fly out here, I've been here for about 2 years now, but doesn't matter where I go, I back and forth, and so I do think about it all the time, so there's really not much for words myself, but
Hello everyone. I am Susan O.J. My grandmother and grandfather were Minnesota. Agatha and Terry Alec from North End of Wabasca. My family is from Big Stone Cree Nation. My parents, Joseph and Veronica Grey Eyes, came to Fort St. John in the early 50s, and they raised their family there. I have 6 brothers and 6 sisters. Connie's one of them. She's was always my dad's baby, and my sister Patsy was always my mom's baby. We're the 2 youngest of my family. But I wanted to tell you guys how I learned about Indian Residential School. I started working at the Treaty 8 Travel Association in 2004, and I was lucky to get into the Treaty and Aboriginal Rights Research Program. And I was so amazed at the interviews that they were doing with elders. So, me being my nosy self, I started interrogating my mom and my kukum. And my mom told me that she worked at the school. And I said, "Wow, you had a job at the school?" And she said, "Yeah, I worked there. I worked there for, I don't know, about 3.5 years till your cooking got sick and I had to go home and help." So I was listening and took all this into my mind, and my cooking came to me. So right away I asked her about my mom. And I told her, how did my mom get a job at the school? And I had to have an interpreter, because part of my challenge was that I could understand Cree, but I couldn't speak it. And that's something that's been lost to me, right? So my mom's interpreting for me, and she asked my kukum, "Well, how did I get that job at the school? Because I worked there." And my kukum looks at her and said, "You didn't have a job at the school. You were there to learn. They were teaching you." And my mom doesn't read or write. So my mom thought that she worked there every day. My dad was also in residential school. There was 2 in Big Stone Cree Nation, an Anglican one, St. John's, that's where my mom went. And then there was St. Martin's, that was the Catholic one, that's where my dad went. So when these common experience payments came out, I wanted to see the records and school records and all these things. And they had children, Métis, 5. There was 5 Métis kids in the class. No names, no nothing. Half-breeds, 10. There was 10 half-breeds in the school. That's how they reported us. That's how they took our people and took their language away and everything that happened. So with this new finding, and everybody's heard these stories, everybody's heard a story about residential school. Everybody here has heard a story about some child saying, "This is what I think I see, but I never told anybody because no one would believe me." So if everyone that here is just learning, like there's lots that you can learn online. There's lots of books that have been written about the residential school and what and where and how and why they did what they did to Indigenous people. My dad used to tell me, no matter what happens, you girls all of you kids are going to learn how to speak English, because we're not in our homeland anymore. We need to be able to work in a white man's world so that people will treat you right. And my mom was traditional, she always spoke Cree to us, and that's why I can understand it and I can't speak it. But like me and Connie were talking earlier today, and I said to Connie, I said, people are always sending you messages because they want you to speak, they want you to talk, they want you to fight for them, they want you to say what needs to be said. And I said, you know what? It's time for everyone to say what needs to be said. We need to say no more. People have to stand up and say, "Fuck this. This is bullshit. If this even fucking happens." The one good thing about this that's happened is nations across Canada are actually united on one thing. Nations across Canada are united in the fact that this should never have happened to us as Indigenous people, and that we stand together. And like Gary said, treat each other with kindness. Remember the 7 teachings that we all were taught: to love, take care of one another, to help when you can help, give when you can give. So that, like, it just, everybody thinks that people knew about all of this stuff. I was in my 30s when I found out about an Indian residential school, because my mom and dad never talked about it. It was a sad, horrible time. Why would you expect your parents to want to tell you and share that with you? So when people say that the Indigenous people didn't say enough, they have. Nobody was listening. So thanks to everyone that was here that supported the Tribal Association, and Connie and Doig and the drummers here. Thank you so much. It's just been awesome to hear the drums again. And we're all like, fuck you government and fuck you Catholic Church.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Darlene Cardinal. I was brought up in Fort Nelson by my Auntie Maggie. She never got to have any kids because when she went to residential school, which was Gruard Mission in Gruard, Alberta, she was taken into the mission when she was 4 years old. Even though my grandparents lived right there in Gruard, she was still not allowed to go home. She endured a lot of hardship in there, not only her, but all the other kids. When they had to peel potatoes, and now not just a little bag of potatoes, these are sacks of potatoes, hundreds of pounds of potatoes. And they would have to peel 3 girls at a time, and they would sit there and peel them. And if they didn't peel those potatoes right to the skin, they would get their hands hit. Their knuckles would bleed, their fingers would cramp. And that isn't only all. If they did something wrong and they didn't even have to do anything wrong, they would have to go on their hands and knees and wash those floors with a toothbrush. And that was their punishments. When they go to bed at night, they'd have to pray for a half an hour and go to bed. Whether you go to the bathroom or not, and heaven forbid if they had to use the bathroom, go pee, because that's what they did in their bed, and they really got tortured. Before they could have breakfast in the morning, they had chores to do. And then they had to pray for another half an hour, and then they had to have breakfast, which was mostly watered down porridge with powdered milk that mostly tasted like water, but they had to eat it because they're hungry. And then again, they had to do the dishes, and then pray again, and go to school. When she was 13, her and my Auntie Rita and 20 more or so young girls were taken into a room in Gruard Mission and sterilized. So they could not have children. And they were told by the nuns that we don't want no more Indian savages brought into this world. And it made them ashamed to be an Indian. My mom and dad could talk Cree, but they never ever taught me how to talk Cree because they didn't want to. I was not allowed to have long hair because that wasn't allowed when she was growing up. And she never had children of her own, so she didn't know. She brought me up the best way she could. So when she cut my hair, she just cut it in all kinds of crooked ways. It didn't bother me because I was just a little girl anyways. It was all crooked bangs and real shorts, but that was okay. But the hardships that they went through and the crying that they did, and she said, down in the basement of the Gruard Mission, which is still standing today, she said that it was so creepy down there, and she knew that the babies and the girls and the boys that were there and went missing, that they were probably buried in that cellar. because it was huge and it was dark and it was cold. And to this day, there's so many residential and missions that are still standing. The only one that I know of that got torn down finally with the government, fighting with the government, the politicians, finally they got their school, they got it torn down, and that was in Lower Post, BC. And that is being torn down now as we speak, and then the new school is going to be built. So the elders and everybody that went to that school can have a clear mind of not seeing that school anymore where they were tortured and beaten and raped and not talk about it. So in our talking with the government and everybody, we need to have all residential and mission schools torn down. And that one in Kamloops needs to come down. I visited 4 years ago in there, and it was so scary and creepy. They tried to remodelize it, but they couldn't. You still weren't allowed to go upstairs, you still weren't allowed to go downstairs. And looking up there at those little tiny windows, it makes you wonder, how many children were up there crying to come down? How many were molested and raped up there? How many were buried down in the basement? They need to tear down every residential and missions that are standing in Canada. Then we will have some part of closure and we can all move on with our lives. Thank you.